In this week's show, our guest is Diana Muniz. We've been friends for a while, and we're fellow artists. And when she was going through chaplain school, it was interesting that I was, I can't remember if I was fit. She had just done a couple of units, and I was just starting. And then we've been comparing notes throughout the years. And originally, we were going to talk about Christian heathenism, and I guess we can weave it into the conversation. We don't want to be too controversial, but we started talking about some very interesting things about why is chaplaincy what it is right now, and how can we make it better. And for those who are not familiar with pastoral services, spiritual care, or what they call clinical pastoral education, is a program to provide spiritual support to patients in hospitals. And we have to kind of go through the history. In a previous show, we talked a little bit about it with my friend who was in the process of studying to be a military chaplain, but he decided to focus on a different career path. But what we were talking about is how there's this almost like boot camp that you go through to become a chaplain. And, you can see it in different ways, but it's supposed to help you handle all kinds of crises and difficult conversations and challenges. But talking to Diana, who, my wife organizes educational programs for a bereaved center. And she told me that Diana was part of one where they discussed the way that the people remember their loved ones, especially in the Latino community. I remember being asked, Latinos, you guys are all about the Day of the Dead and stuff. Like when someone dies, you start dancing and put on a sombrero and put on a mask of a skull and this and that. And I'm like, are you crazy? And they're like, what do you mean? It's like, I know that's what you see in Disney movies, but
oh my God, you
don't really talk about death before, during, or after. And then there are some people who take the more, I guess you would call it, it's more of a indigenous and more earth-based approach, where the way you honor your loved ones is by creating an altar and giving them an offering. And then there's also this thing kind of like with Halloween, where death becomes something that is light. It's not something that it is macabre or morbid, where the skulls are kind of become like playful things instead of being afraid of death. And I know with having small children, that's always a challenge. Like, how do you talk about death in a respectful way, but also in a non-superstitious or scary way? So we can go into that as well. But the most important thing is that you have a very, very interesting background. And I wish I could say that we have a lot of female guests and a lot of people from different backgrounds, but we want to honor everyone from all kinds of different walks of life. So if you can tell us a little bit about your background and what made you get involved in that type of service, because I know you've been serving the community for many years, but what was the shift from art to spirituality, and are they connected, and can you do both and survive in this difficult like financial system that we live in? Economically, the two things that we both love are very hard to make a living out of.
Yeah, very hard. So David, thank you for inviting me. And I'll keep it light and non-controversial. But the question is one that I have asked myself: what made me come into chaplaincy? And you and I met through MECA, multicultural education and counseling through the arts. And MECA had me doing Day of the Dead altar exhibits. And what started happening is I went into it like, oh, I'm a cultural curator. I'm going to be organizing an exhibit. My role here is to organize. And what hit me was incredible. People were bringing items, and they were placed. It was a ritual. They weren't putting art. They weren't fixing. They weren't decorating. They were creating sacred space. And I noticed when they were putting their altar together, that when they were arranging the things on the altar, there was grief. They were moving grief through beauty. And I said, wow, there's a lot going on here. And that's when I began to see that wait a minute, this Day of the Dead is not just a cultural event. This is a sacred feast. And I have come to later, I'm titling a talk that I do through town that is called Dia de los Muertos, a healing feast for the soul. Because what I really realize is that this is a tradition that, if utilized properly, can bring healing. It's not just telling a story. It's not just cultural. If you use the offerings, the altars, if you use the music, if you come into it with your heart, you will experience the ancestors. You will experience that communion, at least connecting to them. And I'm not, trying to be spooky saying that we're, conjuring spirits. But what I'm trying to say is all the symbolic, all the symbols, all the items, they create a presence. And so what I started noticing when I was doing these events was that we're really doing a sacred community healing ritual. So it shifted for me from the fiesta, the party, and just putting altars together, because that's how I saw it. It was a very hollow, the kind of way that people can do Christmas, a whole bunch of decorations, but no meaning. Well, that's how I think people we're doing kind of Day of the Dead. That's how I saw it. And little did I know, when I started seeing the community bringing the items and placing them and moving grief, I'm decorating. And when they're arranging, it's like they're arranging things inside. And people were singing with the mariachis, the songs of joy and sorrow. The last year I curated, we remember the Harvey victims. And we did projections on the stage, and we united it with a dancing performance. And then there was just a silence, and we flashed all the names of the Harvey victims, and people were just crying. We made a community healing ritual. So the Dia de los Muertos, for me, it has to be treated with that sacredness. So that's when my journey began, because I felt like I was doing a ministry. I was like, wait, I'm not just organizing an exhibit here, I'm holding space. And that term, holding space. I'm holding space for the community to come and grieve. And I didn't have the language, holding space, back then, but I said life is more sacred than this, and I want to hold space. I want to know how to lead the community into grieving, into ritual. And so that's what caused my shift to chaplaincy. I'm still a big ritualistic healer, practitioner. I think that's one of my titles that I like to think of myself, not just chaplain. I want to be a ritual healing practitioner, community healing person, that the community can say, oh, who can do a grief ritual? Okay, Diana can gather the community to grieve and to give us ritual space. So I'm working on becoming that. That's how I came into chaplaincy, because I wanted to hold space for community with beauty. And that's the thing, I didn't come into it from a strict seminary kind of background and pastoral. I came from a community arts to this work. And so I landed in chaplaincy kind of by accident, not necessarily. I think it was looking for me, and I found it. I met it. That's how I came to it.
It's interesting that if you ever do community outreach, for something to be truly grassroots, you have to be part of that community. In the medical field, they found that they created a field called promotores de salud, or they're called community health workers. And the idea is that if you train someone within the community to help people deal with their medical problems, that they'll listen more, that they'll feel that you have a vested interest in their well-being, because you're not an outsider that is coming in to do, kind of like they have those AmeriCorps things where they send kids from other places to go teach in the inner city. There's always a clash of cultures when that happens. But if you are someone who is in the midst of it, and then you grow and develop those skills to help your fellow sojourners, then there's this ongoing growth that happens versus, and we were talking about how when someone gets sick and they end up in the hospital, it's like a foreign world because you're entering an institution that has people that maybe you never even interacted with, and now you're going through a crisis, you're dealing with very challenging things, and to how do you transition and how do you connect people without um, we've done a couple of difficult subjects on the show where they say, well, how do you stop police brutality, or how do you stop mistreatment of immigrants or something like that, and all that people can come up with is like, well, you make a presentation and you show it to people, and it's like a presentation is not gonna win the hearts and minds of the providers or of the first responders. Then it becomes like a CEU, like you just get the extra points for watching that, but you haven't had the transformation within yourself to truly understand and walk with the people you're serving. But when you're someone who's been in the struggle, then you're able to provide the, and it's not to be elitist on the other side where you have to be poor and you have to be a minority to be able to connect with other people. But it would be interesting if we had more representation, so then there would be a more holistic approach to people's care. Is that has been your experience working in, I know in Houston we have hospitals from different, almost like classes. You have the poor people's hospital, and then you have the people with insurance and with nice treatment. I worked for a hospital where they had, like, the poor people were the ones that went in for major issues like in the ER and stuff like that. And then they had like a suite where they had the people that went in for plastic surgery. So the hospital was famous for delivering poor people's babies and doing plastic surgery at the same time.
Wow.
And it's in the heart of the medical center, and it's like a specialized place for where everybody gets, you either get dumped there by accident or you end up having elective surgery.
Wow.
And they didn't have chaplains. It now has been taken over by a big corporation, but what is your experience working in this like very challenging places where not only are you dealing with the cultural shock, with the institutionalism, with the barriers from different denominations and groups that they've kind of capitalized on the chaplaincy departments, and being a Latino woman, what has that been like?
I'm telling you, my residency was tough. I asked a question, and I won't name obviously the hospital. I will say it was a TMC, and when I say it was a center, you can edit it out. Yeah. But it was a hospital medical center, and I asked, you know, because my background is so Day of the Dead, and I came from that, and I had such a passion for it. I dared to ask. I was doing a unit in the children's hospital, and I asked one of the managers on the floor, one of the people that were one of the most important people on the floor that was in charge over the programming. And I asked her, I said, hey, it was like October, so the context was that, you know, Halloween, and, you know, it was the fall. And I asked a very innocent question. I said, hey, are you guys going to do any altars? What's that like here? Since it was just 3 years ago, where now it's Dia de los Muertos is mainstream. I mean, Coco had been out, you know? So it's not like Dia de los Muertos was like, huh? You know, like everybody knew. So little did I know, she said, no, we don't do that. And I was like, oh, I was just asking, just kind of feeling things out. Well, I get back to my office and I'm called in. I got in trouble. I got in trouble for asking that. And the feedback was that I shamed her for not having Dia de los Muertos. I mean, I was so, I was just completely, how was that a shaming? How was I, it was a professional question. So I'm in, I don't remain negative, I don't stay in a negative vibe. But I sure hope that I just didn't see there isn't a connection. I still don't see in the chaplaincy field that there is a really embracing of minority culture. I still feel there's a lot of we're in charge. We're in charge. It's our programming. It's our we manage it. There hasn't been a conversation and there isn't a much of a conversation with I think we're just a generation that's entering the field, and I still think that we have to shatter and converse. I think I did work that I kept coming forward. They knew that I would be one to challenge, and I didn't back down. I mean, I didn't do it with like a, trying to be controversial, but I had to. I said, why would you feel that I was shaming you? And I pretty much said, that's your projection. I simply, as a professional woman, I asked you as a professional woman, because I'm reading the context. Most of these patients on this floor are Latinos. My question arose from curiosity and from just naturally thinking, these people will benefit from having this presence of this. This is something that will be familiar to them. Like you said just a little while ago, that hospitals are kind of strange territories. If you were to put those places that evoke the Mexican traditions, it would be inviting to them. And so that was where my question was coming from, and I got in trouble. So that experience just really let me know, as a field, we have to move forward. And I know I understand the whole thing about not being controversial, but we don't have, it's a choiceless choice for me, David. It's a choiceless choice. We're going to have to be a little controversial because the majority of people they have influence and they have power, and they have to kind of calm a little bit down, and we have to, you see what I'm saying? They're here in the programming, and so they're like, hey, step up, but they got to step down too. And that stepping down, they don't want to do it. They're like, y'all come up, but when we come down, they don't like it. But if we ask them to step down, they don't like it either. You see what I'm saying? That was my experience, but I think I come forward and I make these things known, and yeah, people can see it, but I don't feel that they're comfortable still. We're still not, and I don't think it's just chaplaincy. I would say this is global. This is as we step into becoming professionals and being Latinos, we're going to step on toes, because our representation is and as you said, as a woman, it's even lower, because a lot of Latino women are they have kids, and so they don't go into the field, and so we're an even lower number, and so we my representation is way down here, and so we have to keep saying, wait a minute, I don't regret that I asked that question. I don't look at it like, wow, you really, because it needed to be asked. Some questions need to be asked, and it doesn't make people comfortable, but that's on them. It was a good question, and now I hear that they're thinking more of programming. Since I've left, I've heard they're thinking more of programming, including awareness of Dia de los Muertos. Let me
tell you a little story. So I grew up in two parts of Mexico that are very Americanized. And when we would see Day of the Dead stuff, it was like from another planet for us, because there's a spectrum of people from Latin America, from all different backgrounds, different perspectives. So we were very Americanized, and it was Halloween. It wasn't Day of the Dead. So then you come over here and you have people from different parts of Mexico who do celebrate it. And it's kind of like, it's a weird like example, but like Cinco de Mayo. Cinco de Mayo in Mexico is not a thing. It's like a small holiday of the Battle of Puebla, but here is a big thing because somehow it got made part of the Mexican American experience. So Day of the Dead has become part of the Mexican American experience, and for me, it was like foreign a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
but it became part of me when I moved to Tennessee, and I was
Mm.
the only like native Mexican in the whole county. So when someone told me we have an elderly lady who lived in Mexico or who went to Mexico, and at our cemetery, we had the own cemetery at the place where I live, she would do a celebration for Day of the Dead. I was like, okay, cool. But like I've had the only Day of the Dead events that I've been to were at MECA. And MECA is a multicultural education and counseling through the arts. And for them, it's a big event. So as the only Mexican, I was like, it's not my holiday in the sense of like I didn't grow up with it. It's not part of my experience, but that's what people remember or contextualize. So instead of throwing a Cinco de Mayo party where all the people can think about is margaritas and sombreros, let's throw a Day of the Dead party where we teach them how to make dead bread, and where we talk about honoring your ancestors, and different people from whatever religious perspective they have, they're comfortable to honor their ancestors only to a certain point as compared to other ways. So, but I'm like, let's see it as making a memorial and bringing things that matter to that person, and telling stories about your loved one, kind of like the grief process that you're talking about, bringing healing. And then it became a family, not maybe not a ritual, but a family time of remembrance. So you can appropriate a holiday that maybe it wasn't yours and your experience, but it is a lot of people's experience from the Mexican American community, and have a dialogue and have a relationship to that, to honor the culture. Because what happens is that the drive for assimilation in America is so great that suddenly you have to choose between Santa Claus and baby Jesus, between Day of the Dead and Halloween, because you are foreign. Like, it makes you foreign to celebrate something different, especially on the same day. And I don't think it should be like that. I think it should be an enriching experience. And then you have something to talk about. I just don't understand how people get so caught up in their holidays and their things that any other thing becomes a threat. And I think that's what's sad, is that instead of being an enriching experience or a way to grow, suddenly it's like everybody needs to shape up and get with the program. And if not, they're causing trouble, or they're bringing foreign things. And like you said, they're positive foreign things. Like, it's not like they're doing a satanic ritual. They're doing something that it brings them comfort. So why can we honor what brings other people comfort?
Right. There's nothing threatening about I've had people who were atheists come to like I was doing workshops for altars, and I mean, I had a lady who was an atheist, and she did her little altar, and she said, I don't believe the ancestors are coming, but I felt something. And I said, well, you know what? You felt the memory of your loved one, and that presence, it came alive because it's charged with all the music and the love and the so. And then she was like, are they here? Are they supposed to be here? Are y'all teaching that they're here? And I said, no, it's what you make of it. I mean, some people, I mean, I'm a mystic. I consider myself a kind of mystic person, and so for me, they're here. They're with me. But to you, being that you're an atheist, for you is just the memory is so alive, and that's fine. Everybody's going to experience connecting with the ancestors in their way. I'm not sure where the threat comes from, but I think that's where we need religious literacy, and to understand that it's safe to understand a practice without feeling that you have to that you're doing it like a religious thing. Like, it's you can go to a cultural event and enjoy it. There's freedom in Christ. There's freedom in Christ. And if you know who you are religiously, your religious address, your ID, your DNA, what is there to be worried? I think people who are threatened and worried is because they don't know where they stand. I've never seen it as I can go into a Jewish temple and feel at home. I can go into a Hindu temple and feel okay, because I know my home. you know, and I can sense the divine in many traditions. I sense the divine. It may not be where I choose to do my own devotion, but I feel the divine with many traditions. So I think we need to train chaplains to have an open mind, you know, and they're just it's seminary that is not, the seminaries want you to be more fixated in the doctrine of the that particular faith. They train you to like be flawless in your doctrinal view, and it kind of, chaplaincy is like unlearning that, unlearn what you learned in seminary. But then there's some seminaries that are very progressive and very open-minded, and they're very much in tune with that reality. But other seminaries are kind of like, you need to be accurate, you need to be accurate, you know. There's a theological obsession with being theologically perfect or correct, or and I really don't think it's that. I think empathetic, the empathy element is what's more important. You know, Jesus said, speaking from a Christian context, that he said, you're going to know who my disciples are based on love, not based on how good is their theology. You know, based on love, the fruit of what people give you. If I'm listening to somebody empathetically, then that shows I'm a good disciple, not, you know, that I told them they're going to hell and they need to get saved, you know. So speaking the language of empathy is how people see the beauty of the faith. And empathy is about openness, meeting people where they are. If their worldview is Hindu, well, that's where they are, you know, and that's empathetic. That's the empathetic language. And it's pretty okay to meet people, but people aren't comfortable. People are very uncomfortable because they feel like they need to impose. I'm going to tell you how it is. That's ego, you know. I mean, if the spirit is moving and the person asks you a question, I think, yeah, go ahead. But people feel like they're failing God somehow, or they're failing their denomination or their tradition if they don't speak out that tradition's language. They feel like they're failing that tradition. Well, I got to say that. No, you don't. You know, you have to walk in with empathy and compassion, and that's the call of the chaplain. So, you know, to have that empathetic language.
So what I've experienced is a spectrum in the institutions and the big hospitals. I feel that there's more like free flow or more, I guess, modern spiritual perspectives, where they want you to be more modern. They don't want you to be as traditional. That was my experience. There's there's kind of like an orthodoxy on how you're supposed to do chaplaincy, but then there's these kind of like modern perspectives. Mm-hmm. And then in hospice and in other types of chaplaincy is more like a traditionalist perspective. So I was taken aback when I heard some chaplains in hospice say, well, I need to know my theology because I get asked questions and I have to answer them. And I was like, that's not what a chaplain is supposed to do. So this one person was saying that they had to have the right answer regarding who goes to heaven and how they go to heaven and resurrection and stuff like that. And it was like, your job is not to debate people or to try to prove a particular perspective. Exactly. Your job is to help them find answers for themselves and for them to be at peace with whatever perspective they come up with. And so what I see is that there's a lot of work. And again, we want to be positive and we want to help push forward. But there's a lot of work to be done either by imposing like a very unorthodox perspective on people who are a little more traditional, or keeping the traditional perspectives as the only choice within these different groups. And then people who are open-minded or think outside of the box, or like you said, forward-thinking, they're kind of shunned because they don't fit their mold. You either have to be super liberal or super traditional. And then if you're somewhere in between, or someone who's working things out and more focused on the patient and where they're at, that's the ultimate goal.
That's the ultimate
goal. The actual getting to it is what the challenge is. And then when we talk about the voices of different peoples, like, why is the representation so small? Do you think that, you know, they never want to talk about, in a sense, almost like affirmative action, where they would bring more Spanish speaking and bilingual chaplains, or they would bring more minorities. But isn't it time to kind of start considering at least to be a little more diverse in the hiring process and in the people that they have available? Because
it's way beyond time to. It's way beyond time. I mean, I was looking at a position that said bilingual hospice chaplain, and it was interesting to me that it said the word bilingual. So I posted a question in a chaplain forum, and it was like 7 out of, and I got a huge response, and it was like 7 out of 10 people were dismissing it. Like, well, we have interpreters, or well, you don't really need to be paid extra for being a bilingual chaplain. And I was like, well, that's interesting. I speak 2 languages. I consider that a skill that I could earn a bit. But it was like they were, no, you're not special. And I felt that was a bit, I really was like, what's going on with that? And again, it's not trying to be negative. It's just that was the way the room was read. I was like, wow. And there was like a few people saying, why wouldn't you pay somebody extra if she has these skills? Yeah, you know, she's collapsing the work of 2 people. She's collapsing the interpreter and the chaplain into one role. Why wouldn't that be extra? She's doing the job of 2 people. And they all understand that, because they, in a hospital chaplaincy, they understand the interpreter's role, and that's an extra paid role. So I was like, yeah, I'm collapsing 2 roles into one. Why wouldn't that merit extra pay? And it was interesting to me that there was no, most was like, nah, we don't see it. And that was telling. So it tells me that we're arriving. The need for us is here, but I'm not so sure that people in the field, it's kind of like COVID, like what happened, you know? So all of a sudden, before we were immigrants and they were trying, they were looking how to help us. Now we're in their ranks. Now we're among the ranks of the professional, trying to also help our own. You know what I'm saying? Like, that hasn't quite, oh, wait a minute, she belongs to the group we're trying to help, but she's one of us now. And you see what I'm saying? Like a little bit of a competitive now. She's coming into, there was a little bit of that. And so how do we, in the field, we have to be vocal and say, hey, we have to say, as much as it makes people uncomfortable, it's not courting fights, it's not courting discord, but it is saying, we do deserve to have a little higher wage, or we do deserve, or if you like, you can speak Spanish, you know? One of the things that I find odd is that I've seen African-American chaplains take the time to want to speak Spanish. Like, they will invest in taking lessons to speak Spanish, whereas I don't see the same from my other peers in Anglo groups. They really don't, they're not as motivated, you know? However, in other occupations, I do see it, like in other executives and other fields, and they do see the need to learn Spanish. I haven't seen it as much in chaplaincy.
I talked to a police officer once, and he told me that if you're bilingual, you get a raise in your pay, and if you have a master's, you get a raise in your pay. And I know that in the chaplain world right now, you have to have a particular kind of master's to join the majority of the big hospitals. So why can they have different tiers? Like, say, well, if you're bilingual, you get an extra, and if you have you know, so many credits, you get so much, and then you have all the credits, you get, so like that, there is more diversity. Do you know much about the controversy between what is it, what's it called? It's called the New York group. They're competing against ACPE.
Spiritual care. Spiritual care.
Originally, they were called healthcare chaplaincy. What are they called now?
Spiritual care.
Okay, so
I think they're just called, yeah.
What I heard is that the guy who's in charge now, he wants to make everybody spiritual care provider. So he wants to have social workers, nurses, anybody who's interested in spiritual care be a chaplain. And then the traditional group, ACPE, Association of Clinical Pastoral Professionals, they want only people to have a Master of Divinity or an equivalent.
Wow.
And what happens is that they feel that it's cheapening the profession because it's almost like a gilded profession, that unless you have the right type of education, you're not able to do the work. But in our conversation before the show, we were talking about how much truly counseling do you get in a seminary? How much truly, you were mentioning stuff that I hadn't even heard of, theology of children, birth and death, rituals,
Yeah.
and meaning making, the ability to support people in time of crisis, sexual assault and domestic violence training. You get
Racism. You could
right.
have a whole field of chaplaincy. If a chaplain, I've thought about it, if you just became a racial justice educator and then put on top of that chaplain, you could be a chaplain. You could be assigned to work and train police departments. You could go train, you see what I mean? You find the racial justice educators, get certified, and then as a chaplain, but see the police chaplains, they don't have this kind of training. I don't know of a police chaplain that has taken a class with Lee Monroe, who's the biggest racial justice educator of the past 20 years. You know, he did the movie The Color of Fear. I'm talking a big movie documentary director. He's been, you know, he does workshops of racial justice. He's been doing them for over 30 years. You take a workshop with him, you go train police departments. It's like, why aren't chaplains doing this kind of social work? Where Masters of Divinity don't have these focuses. Death, there's a whole thanatology study. Yeah, Master of Divinities don't, how, when you're working in a hospice, how does church planning help? Church planning Greek, when you're helping a family die, it won't serve you. So if you take a thanatology course, thanatology, I'm taking a class right now with the Institute for the Study of Birth, Breath, and Death. A Unitarian Universalist yoga teacher who wrote a book called Holding Space, Loving, Dying, and Letting Go. She's worked as a chaplain. She's worked as a comparative religion scholar. She's training us to become teachers of how to hold space, living, loving, and loving, dying, and letting go. But that's her background, comparative religion, Unitarian Universalism. But her institute, because she's you know, coming to these conversations like what we're having, she was like, I need to take these. She worked as a chaplain. She was like, what's all this religious spaghetti here? Everybody's in a religious, you know, religious. And so she's like, I'm going to take the mystery of birth. I'm going to take the mystery of death, which is embedded in all of the world, and I'm just going to make an institute where we explore these mysteries and we serve people from the study and the exploration of these mysteries, accompanied by a whole lot of counseling, a whole lot of psychology, nurses. I mean, I'm taking this class with RN, with nurses, with all kinds of professionals, and we're just diving deep into holding space in these mysteries. And that's what I need. I'm not going back to take Hebrew and waste more money and have more hours of classes that I don't need. I need what she's offering. You know, the Institute for the Study of Birth, and Death. That's an amazing, innovative study approach. She's getting, especially right now during COVID time, she's slammed. She's getting so much work, you know, and seminaries, you know, they're trickling, you know, it's kind of, you know, business isn't exactly up. So we need these innovative schools and institutes to I mentioned it in one of the chaplain pages because I like to come in and learn about the field. I consider myself still a newcomer. You've been in the field longer. And so I come in to learn, and I mentioned the institute, and they just thought I put in some kind of weird, you know, I posted a post from the Institute of Birth, Breath, and Death. And they were like, whoa, you know, is she Wiccan? You know, is she Wiccan? What's going on? And I'm like, these are the mysteries of your own religion. And you're uncomfortable with them. I find it really interesting. But I'm not trying to be negative. I'm just, I just think we're a bit lacking, I think. I think we need to be more, and there's those innovative chaplains there's innovative chaplaincy, and I'm glad for them, you know, there are. I'm not going to be negative and think everybody's not.
Well, let's talk about the history of the chaplain movement, because to me, it always seemed kind of like backwards. Instead of the pastoral care providers, the spiritual guides to be in the forefront of the latest stuff, we're kind of like getting bits and pieces from psychology and counseling. So what I heard was that in the 70s, there was this push for creating a Christian counseling program, and that the seminary said, okay, well, we'll create family licensed professionals and pastoral counselors as a field, and we'll be certified within those fields to provide that care in our churches or in our communities. Yeah. And then chaplaincy came out of that, where people had all these credits, or at least an introduction to counseling, and then it became its own thing within hospitals in a professional thing. But the stuff that you read in chaplain school, it's like ancient stuff. You're learning about these guys who were interested in spirituality, but it was kind of like they're the few people in the psychological field who cared about religion and spirituality or archetypes, something like that. But what about the latest stuff? And you would have presentations about people who deal with the brain, or they try to measure meditation and other types of trance-like states and the way that it affects your health and things like that. But it was all piecemeal. What you're talking about, it sounds like this kind of like head on, like we're not like the extra guy in the healing process. We're the one who's kind of bringing up things that are very uncomfortable, like talking about death, talking about the challenges that could happen when someone is born. Even to me, is the biggest issue that you deal with, and no one ever wants to talk about this, is
for example, I did not know. Oh no, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Theodicy, this idea that bad things happen to good people. You know, there was one guy who wrote about that, and then no one's ever addressed it. And if you want to come back, or if we can do an extra hour, we can talk about this kind of like very simplistic understanding of religion. But what is this? What is holding the spiritual care providers in the medical field from being in the forefront and helping people grow and understand the human experience? Because we're dealing with their emotions, their fears. Go ahead.
Well, I think you just hit it on the nail with that word, human experience. Is the theological, Karl Renner, I think is a theologian. See, before Karl Renner, who's I think a Catholic Jesuit voice, he put before Karl Renner in the 20th century, theology is pigeonholed in the Trinity, you know, the cosmos. The theology is very conceptual, heaven, you know, the angels and the Christology, you know, these very lofty theological. And Karl Renner in the 50s and 60s said, wait, we need to bring this down to human experience, what you said. So Karl Renner began to, and then what happened is the theologian, the priests that were studying in Rome happened to be Latin America. They began extracting his students. Gustavo Gutierrez, the liberation theology of the 70s, is Karl Renner, the one who seeded the ideas in all these theologians, because he was saying, God is with the poor. Let's examine that. God's with, but I think a lot of our seminary, a lot of chaplaincy is still stuck in that lofty Trinity, Christology. You see what I mean? That abstract theology that doesn't connect to human experience, death, birth. These are very messy, negative, the problem of evil. the problem of racism is a problem of part of the conversation of evil. So I think that's where the seminary isn't advancing. I think part of the problem that is the seminary approach, that there's still, some of them are still very much in that lofty theology. That's what an MDiv is. Ecclesiology, Christology, you know, all these big theological, but they're not very big on the human experience. Because human theology hasn't addressed that. And it did address it, but a lot of people aren't there. That's like the Latino theology, because they're at war. They're at war, so they need that theology. They're poor over there in Latin America. That's their theology, without realizing, you know, that because America is so rich and prosperous and leading, and God bless America, sure, you know, but it's kind of like, it makes you not progress. Our own success, our own richness and abundance, we don't see the theology that we need to have. That's why there's a disconnect between as you said earlier in this part of the conversation, that the people that, why is there a disconnect between those of us who have the education and those we serve, the poor? Because there is no connection there. We haven't lived, you know, I'm connected because I lived in Nicaragua. I come from a revolutionary war, so I'm connected to suffering. That's just part of my story. But that's in the case with many of the, you know, people with privilege. But I think our theology we have to integrate to the human experience. And if you don't have poverty, everybody gonna die. We're all gonna die. And death is we all have to become more human in dying. Everybody has to see the spirituality of death. Jesus died. Jesus was absolutely 100% human in entering the death experience. But I almost feel like Christianity, like I had a relative of mine who's a strong Christian. She posted the other day, we don't want nothing to do with death. We're never gonna, you know, we're just gonna, it was like, we're gonna fly up in heaven with Jesus. And it's like, and on my mind, I'm like, but it's okay to die. And you have to learn how to die beautifully, because that's the will of God for you. And then women that birth, all of a sudden in Christianity, no men, I mean, birth is such a heavy, spiritually intense experience. And you know about that. There's a woman psychologist. She wrote a book about the shadow. You've heard of Carl Jung, the shadow work. When a woman is pregnant, the reason the postpartum comes upon a woman is because of there's the hormonal part, but also there's a lot of spiritual things moving in her psychologically when birth is about to happen. And then here comes all the hormones, natural hormones, and then the medical hormones. And it's just like, you know, there's this, and I would have not known that unless I had seen the work of this psychologist. But again, it's getting into that shadow work and that dark humanity, death. I don't know why Christians run away from that, because we've been taught that we're light and love, you know. And I think we need to be comfortable in darkness, be comfortable with the conversation of evil, be comfortable with birth. You know, everything is hide birth, hide death, hide it. And it's sad, because those are the things that make us fully human. And God was not afraid to be human, but we're afraid to be human. We run away from being human, and God wanted to enter into this communion and humanity. He seemed to really want to be part of this. And I think I just don't see that. I feel like unless I had really come to this, I think I would have been like, I just need to glow like Jesus and be a little light, this little light of mine. I'm gonna, you know. And now I'm like, oh, come on, you know, get in touch with that humanity, the human experience of pain, touch grief, touch death. And I think we as Christians, we've also sold to the prosperity gospel, you know. Are you thriving? Are you, do you have a car? Do you have a home? You know what I mean? Christianity is also pretty much into that. Here in the US, you know, Christianity is really driven to this success model, corporate model, It walks syncopated. The church is like, capitalism. The church also like abundance, prosperity. And we flee from humanity. And I think that's sad. I certainly have enjoyed learning about death through the Day of the Dead, but through just reading. I don't know if have you ever heard of Stephen Jenkinson?
No.
No, okay. Beautiful writer. And he wrote a book called Die Wise, D-I-E Wise, Y-S-E, about dying wisely. And he said something really interesting. He said, not happiness, not success, not happiness, because, America, the pursuit of happiness. He said, not happiness, not success, but the cradle for your love of life is death. Not happiness, not success. And I think there's a lot of truth in that, that when we face death, not as a morbid thing, but when we face the reality of, hey, our time is going to expire, it counterintuitively, it helps us more focused, more present, more joyful, but people are afraid. We have not had good teaching into how to lean into these mysteries. What does that mean? The mystery of faith. Well, mystery, don't go there. No, you're supposed to go to the mystery. You're supposed to look at it, and not with the arrogance of trying to figure it out and find it, but with we're meant to explore it. Not with the arrogance that we're ever going to get any, like a researcher. Any researcher knows that he's going to spend 40 years in a lab asking a question he may never have answered. But it doesn't mean that in the 40 years he hasn't found a whole lot that was probable. And I think that's the Christian walk. I mean, we go to the mysteries. I'm certainly invited, and I'm definitely in the mysteries, not as a curious person, but because I feel called to them, because the community suffers from not understanding them. Not understanding death is going to be a big deal, because, as when you show up at a hospice and that family can't register. Grandma's going to die. They've never done any preparation from it. It's a lot more pain. It's a painful experience. But when a family grows up with the knowledge of death, with a healthy knowledge of death, it's a better transition. People die beautifully. And I like to say, that was a beautiful death. And people are like, what do you mean that was a beautiful death? And yeah, you can die beautifully. The Bible says that you learn more in the funeral than in the party. The Bible does talk a lot about it. If we're paying attention, it's a good teacher, But like I said, I think we're out of touch with the humanity, because we're all trying to be so godly. I think it's good to be godly, don't get me wrong, but I'm also pretty okay being really human. I'm okay with that,
How are you doing on time? You brought up a lot of important subjects. Do you have another?
I have time. Yeah.
So from your experience, and I'm very detached from Mexico. I came when I was 15, so I don't read up on what's going over there, other than like the major events. Are there theologians or people that you are aware of that are discussing suffering? Because whenever you think about Latin American theologians, it always goes back to liberation theology.
Right.
And I'm a little uncomfortable with that, because now we're talking about revolution and taking up arms and reinterpreting pacifistic passages in the Bible to make them sound more violent, or at least resistance. And right now, I've been doing a lot of thinking about that when there's protesters that are taking different approaches, and thinking about what is the right approach from a spiritual perspective. But what about the issue of suffering? Do you feel that that's something that also is not discussed? And do we have something to bring to the table regarding our own experience of suffering, and maybe the spiritual connection with suffering that can help our patients? Because I wonder if you haven't gone through too many tragedies in your life or too many challenges, how is it that you're able to truly even internalize some of the stuff that we see in the crisis moments that we're out there with the family.
Well, I think empathy, and even if I haven't, even if I haven't had a suffering, being really, I'm willing to feel. The Bible says, "Weep with those who weep." You may not know their sorrow, but if you're just sorry for their suffering, if you have the empathetic muscle, just hurting for them, hurting to see them crying, hurting to see their suffering. I don't think we have to have their experience in order to connect to empathy. I don't think, in other words, if I'm, I can have just as much empathy for a African American family suffering with racism, but I don't have to have had a racism experience to feel empathy. And so having the wisdom of empathy, the gift of empathy, praying for it, asking to just be moved with empathy and human pain. We don't necessarily need to have had that particular experience, but just to feel moved by their sorrow is very moving to me. I wasn't feeling very empathetic with the whole COVID-19. I was not empathetic at all. I mean, I've been like, I'm okay. You know why? Because I was like, welcome to my childhood. When COVID-19 started, I had no empathy. I was like, welcome to my childhood. As a matter of fact, in Nicaragua, I was under a bed, and bullets were flying everywhere, and I didn't get to, you're lucky your kids get to go out. I had to be under a bed or in a closet, or my head would get shot at. So when all these people started shutting down, I was like, welcome to my childhood. So what, and I didn't know that wasn't right. I was like, well, I need to be empathetic because I can't relate to this. Oh my God, this guy's fault. To me, it was like, come on, this isn't really a whole lot. But then I began to really think about it and say, I want to have empathy for the like that they have not been through this. And my heart began to soften, from that spot, because I was like, then I began to think, my goodness, I was privileged to have had that much suffering in my childhood, because it became integrated, post-trauma integration, if you want to use that word. And from that, I felt like I could feel sorrow for people who haven't had this much suffering. I could feel sorrow, because then I was like, how in the world could I make from suffering so much? Then I could find that a place of privilege. I really do. I found myself, man, I'm privileged that I suffer that much, because now I can sustain space. I can hold people in resiliency and help. But then George Floyd happened, and I that broke my heart. And I was like, a bit removed and, empathetic. But when George Floyd happened, I cried. There was a crack in my heart. And I'm not African American. I've never, because I'm so light skinned, I also have Latino white girl privilege, because I'm a light-skinned Latina. So I've had some kind of, oh, she's Greek, she's European, she's Italian. So I've had those little privileges, But when George Floyd died, it broke my heart. I had to cry. Like, that was the catalyst. And I haven't suffered racism, but just moving into the grief of the world. I have to be connected to the grief of the world. There's grief in nature. There's grief in society. And if I'm going to serve the people, I have to connect to that. I have to find a way. And I said, oh my God. And I said, what's going on? I couldn't. And then finally my heart just cracked open. And I said, I needed to feel this weeping for George Floyd and his horrible lynching, the public lynching. And I broke down. But I think connecting to the sorrow, I said, no, I need to connect to the sorrow. I don't need to observe it. I'm observing it. Like I was observing COVID-19. I was like, all right, look at y'all freaking out. And I wasn't. And then I began to ask God to show me, why was I so observant and not compassion, not entering into that sorrow. And the Holy Spirit said, you're privileged. You have had a lot of suffering. You have had harnessed a lot of strength, and you need to feel sad that they're sad. And I did. I found it in me. I began to find it in me. But George Floyd really broke my heart. And I think asking God, if we're people of God, we're people of mystery, we're people that we're connected to the universe, then the universe, as it's feeling the sorrow of people, we have to feel that sorrow too, you know. So I think just being empathetically, not necessarily, oh, I had that experience so I can connect. I don't necessarily think that's true. Was there another part to this question, or was that it?
Well, I'm glad that you went into the biggest crux of what's happening right now. This program is going to be broadcasted at different times, so I'm kind of building up my response to the George Floyd. The term would be tragedy, because it brought to the forefront the suffering of a lot of people that has that's been dismissed. And you know, I was standing back looking at it, trying to make sense of what happened, because if you what I've realized is that unless you have experienced it yourself, it doesn't hurt as much. I'm glad that you know, some of us have the sensitivity to be empathic and to put ourselves in other people's experiences, but until it hasn't directly affected you, it's really easy to be like, well, that's their challenge. But there was a family that was interviewed on TV that they had adopted 3 African-American children, and they didn't even think about it. They went and started protesting because they saw their children as possible victims in the future. And and when you think about Hispanic children, depending on where they live or how they look, that, you know, they might not be as much risk or what they're doing. So so it's easy to say, well, that's not what I be involved in or what I would experience. But to be that callous means that you have very little love for humanity, because the more you study the suffering of African Americans in this part of the world, you realize that all they're asking for is respect and access to the same rights as everyone else. And when that doesn't happen, how do you expect for people to react? You know, it's easy to say, well, we all need to stay cool and collected and try to, you know, talk it through. But there comes to a point, it's like a boiling pot, that there's been so much pressure and there's been so many injustices that it's gonna boil over, and it is gonna suddenly, if you want to dismiss it and push it down, it's finally gonna slap you in the face. And I think it's before all this happened, you and I were talking about the immigrant community and the Latino community, and how the Latino community did not have the same type of organizational skills as the African American community or even the LGBT community. We're all divided and everybody's doing their own thing and everybody's picking sides. Or what I realized is that we're so much trying to assimilate and so much trying to be accepted, that why would we put ourselves in that target, that suddenly you start speaking out and you start bringing attention injustices and you're easily dismissed. Oh, you're just a rebel rouser, you're just someone who's not fully integrated into society, or something like that. Or they go with the stereotypes, you know, as part of your upbringing or your personality type or whatever.
I'm an 8 or whatever, you know, the Myers-Briggs. That's why you do that, because you're a challenger. You know, that's what I would get from my CPE program. I was told, well, you're whatever the number was, I forgot. No wonder you challenge things, because you're an 8.
So instead of realizing is that you challenge it because you have that sensitivity, and like we have a sensitivity to feel for people, we have sensitivity for what's wrong, because we come from challenging places where your voice is not heard. And you know, when you try to, like, in the spectrum between police actually does their job and police commits crimes, we come from countries where they're mostly on the crime side. So we feel that police here is great compared to the other stuff that we have heard of or experienced. But
Yeah.
where, as spiritual people, as moral people, where do we draw the line? It's like enough is enough. Like that we have to get involved, because I was also taking a step back with the concern about immigrant children and the displacing of families, or not reunifying kids with their families. I've been involved in that in the past, and I felt like I
Yeah.
was kind of burned out, because
Burned
you
out.
really have your hands tied. You can't do much, and protesting for me only does so much. But when you start seeing that protesting actually works in small ways, and that there's
Small
actually
ways.
pressure that has been placed on these very strong institutions and systems, then you start wondering, it's like, maybe now is the time for everybody to stand up and say something, so then we can push it forward. The question is they always say, well, then you open the floodgates, where now everybody's issue and everybody's um, discontentment with all kinds of issues is going to be all brought up at the same time. And that's some of the struggles I was having with an activist friend of mine, that I was like, what are the demands? Because if we demand the whole world, that's going to be impossible for the other side to even process or to take us seriously. But we have to have very poignant things that we are requesting and helping them achieve that. So I saw the movie Selma, and Martin Luther King said something that I found very profound. He said, we make a demand, and if they don't respond, we march. And then if they still don't respond, then we bring attention either through the media, or we put more pressure on the government. So he had a tactic and a system that he followed. And every time that there was an issue, that they would follow the same system. And then sometimes it was successful, and in other times it wasn't. But it was a methodical way to bring about change. I feel right now it's a free for all. I feel like we're back at like the Occupy movement, where it's like a leaderless rebellion, and it just dissipates easily because they get demonized. So there's also the element of being professional. So how do we bring about change within our fields without creating so much ruckus that it's easy for people to say, it's not time, this is not the right place, who are you? Like, because marching in the street is one thing, you're bringing pressure on the whole system, but bringing pressure within your field and creating positive change, I don't think anybody has figured it out. So in your,
I think, go ahead.
no, it's
Well,
just,
I think there's
like, what can we do that it is constructive versus destructive? Like some people have gotten frustrated and just created more.
in our, okay, speaking of our field, what I had those thoughts the other day. I said, and I find that debating is useless. It's just useless. Like, to get online and like, you have to what I did is I identified progressive thinking chaplains that were very fair-minded and were not reactive, were not tone deaf. I identified like 5, and I said, like, if I wanted to push a reform, or I think I have to call on the key investors who feel like me, who are supportive of, who have my same worldview. And unfortunately, right now, let's say in the field of chaplaincy, I have to, most of them are white. Most of the people in the places of influence and power are white people. And I think I have to kind of have that approach of, hey, I have this conversation. Can we have a conversation? What do you think I should do? And be aware that they're your allies, they're your helpers. But I wouldn't debate it. I wouldn't make large efforts. I would key in on key people that agree with or that will say, you're right, or you have some good ideas. I think it's going to keep people who agree with your worldview and who find it fair, that what you're saying is fair. And I think starting a conversation with them. But I think debating opinions is just futile. You know what I mean? Like getting on a forum and just kind of that controversy and shouting your point out. No, it's pretty much a waste of time. You have to really get into conversation with leadership. That's pretty much it. And being a leader, and then realizing, hey, you know what, I'm a leader here, and not being afraid to step into that leadership role. And I think having a controversial opinion is not a bad thing. A leader's gonna, like, think of Colin, what's his name, the football player, Colin, I always forget the last name.
Kaepernick.
Colin Knapp. Yeah, you know who I'm talking about. And when he stood up, he was the lone protester. And where is he now? So being the lone wolf is okay. You're going to be righted. The universe will turn in your favor. I think getting into the key leader and having conversation with them, like if let's say you and I approach a board or one organization and said, can we have a dialogue, or can we, like I was in a Zoom the other day with key leaders in the Hispanic community. I was invited by my CPE supervisor because COVID-19, and this is the way they moved. The leadership in Memorial Hermann Hospital is really kind of calling the alarm about COVID-19 and the Hispanic community. And they didn't have a huge 500, whatever, a big conference. It was just like 10 of us on a Zoom call. And basically the Memorial Hermann leadership was asking us, what was our opinion? They don't even know how the Latino community communicates, because they're like, why are y'all getting sick? I mean, literally Memorial Hermann executive, public health executive was like, why are y'all getting sick? Like, educate me. Why are y'all getting sick? Are y'all not listening to Telemundo? And I went and had this big conversation with my mom, and I said, Mom, what's going on? And your mom is like, I don't watch Telemundo. And then I found out while we were conversing, we as Hispanics are like they don't understand us, that we're not this monolithic block. There's immigrations. And then you have like Latinos like me and you that are more like a professional, and we're more attuned to American, do you understand? We're tuned into American society. And then there's this whole vast amount of Latinos who are not paying attention to Telemundo. They're paying attention to Mexico. And then they're not on the internet. They can't navigate the internet. They're on WhatsApp. He didn't know the public health executive at Memorial Hermann didn't know that really WhatsApp. It's not Facebook. So it's like, from the American mindset, it's like, well, of course I know what's going on with COVID. There's so much information in Facebook, because that's what he uses. And I'm like, but Latinos, the bulk of Latinos who are working in taquerias or cutting lawns, they're not looking at Facebook, they're on WhatsApp. And they're going to fiesta. And then I brought up the point, there's a little bit of machismo too, because a lot of these men que son bien Latinos, the men, macho Latino, they don't want to put on a mask. I mean, like, I went to get my oil change. There were about, and I went to these like Latino shops, what I'm talking about, the little shops, not the big discount tire, because I'm trying to get a bargain. So I go to the little tire shops owned by Latino men. You understand what I'm talking about? There are like 12 men, none of them wearing a mask. None of them social distancing. And me and a woman from El Salvador are the only ones wearing a mask. And I told her, I said, look at mira los hombres. And she was like, se creen machos, se creen que no. So she and I are like, why are the men not covering up? So we had to, so what I'm saying is, to answer your question, I just set this example that he didn't make a big plea to like a lot of people. He just pulled 10 of us and started having a conversation. So I think in the field of chaplaincy, it's going to be like that. It's going to take maybe taking if you know other spiritual care people, Latinos, spiritual care workers, let's get together and have a conversation, and then get someone in leadership to kind of advise us or show us, or at least hear us. But I think that's how we'll move forward. I think is keying in on who is leading, who is an influencer, and as far as, you know, again, he approached us, and I said, we all gave him ideas about why Latinos are getting, you know, so the information, they know why they're getting infected. They just don't understand how to get information out, because they don't understand why Latinos are not informed. They seem to be, there's a gap. They don't understand. Like, and I, you know, I've attended COVID death, and people are surprised. And one of the things I hear consistently from Latino people that are dying of COVID, they were restaurant workers, they were going to church. And my last patient last week, he was an evangelical Christian that said, no, she's not infected. The blood of Jesus is keeping her, you know, like Lysol, you know, the blood of Jesus is Lysol. it's, you know, the blood of Jesus. And that was so sad. I mean, I'm not trying to make fun. I mean, that's quite sad. And trust me, I'm not making fun of it, and I don't mean to, but I feel really sad. It is a kind of like a funny, tragic thing, because his wife, after I had the conversation with him, his wife died of COVID. And he said, no, she's not infected. I plead the blood of Jesus on her, and I plead the blood of Jesus on her every night. She can't be infected. And so there's this huge communication gap, and that's where he wanted to know. And he wanted to make a call out to pastors, because see, what happens is in the Hispanic community, you have a huge block of evangelical pastors, Pentecostal, you know, evangelical. And then you have your Protestant, you know, your Baptist and Presbyterian. They tend to be more educated, more seminary trained, more formal. And then you have the vast, you know, the Pentecostal, all those kind of evangelical groups. They're not as, I don't know if I'm saying it, what the right word is, but they don't emphasize educational training. Do you see what I'm saying? And so there's this huge gap.
There's an anti-intellectualism from the charismatic movement.
Okay, it's safe to say, is that the way?
You see it in all kinds of evangelicals, like even the ones who are seminary trained, they're like, I don't want to hear about this stuff, because they fall into the fear of like, they think everything is conspiracy theory, or the government trying to tell them what to do, or something like that. And it's sad, because you would think that because because you're saying that there's the ones that don't have an education, the ones that do have one. Even the ones that have an education choose not to listen to scientific information, because they think it's almost like a hippie thing. Like, if you put on a mask, that means that you're a socialist. And it's like, how is that it? Like, so yeah. It's been very disturbing how easily people have been swayed one side or the other, when it's something that affects everyone. Like, one thing we've talked about on the show is that no matter your race, your socioeconomic status, even if you wanted to run away to Canada or back to Germany or whatever, it would come and get you. The coronavirus is that difficult of a pandemic that we're all on the same boat. But now we're seeing people that we know and that we come across who are infected. Before, it was kind of like something you would hear about in the media. Now is becoming real to a lot of people.
Right, and I feel that this Hispanic community it hasn't dawned on them, and a lot of them are, you know, where the Anglo community has gone and they can quarantine safely at home, and they send their shoppers, you know, well-to-do white people aren't going to HEB. They're sending Instacart, you know, they're sending drivers out to get their shopping. But, you know, your Hispanics, they have to go to taquerias. They're the ones moving all that restaurant. That huge industry in Houston of restaurant that's all the Hispanics cooking. And they're the ones getting sick, you know. So it is what I was telling him. I said, well, but there's demand. There's a huge demand for the cooking to happen. And who's washing dishes and cooking right now? It's the Hispanics. Not the Black people. Most people dying of coronavirus is Hispanic, which shocked me when the CEO, I don't know if this is going into a different direction, but the CEO of Goya, as you heard, made that comment that he praised Donald Trump when, you know, Donald Trump is a builder. I'm like, he builds what? Buildings? Because he certainly cuts down our people. And I find it really odd that, and here's the thing that I saw in this whole silliness that you know, we saw presence with when the pandemic first hit. We saw HEB leader just stood out there. He was like the HEB bill. I mean, he was so visible. Where's Goya been during the pandemic when it's all the Hispanic dying? Where are they? Do they come? And I asked people who monitor Univision or Telemundo, and I've said, since the pandemic hit, have y'all seen the Fiesta executives? Have y'all seen Aranda's executives? Have you seen all the business leaders in Houston take stock, encourage Latinos to wear masks? Have you seen them? They're not donating or involved. So that in our community, there's a lack of corporate, what's the word? Corporate responsibility. There's a word for it. There's not, I don't think that's the right word, where the corporation is invested in the welfare of the community. I don't see that. I see they're invested in profit. So I feel like the pandemic really has to shift the way Hispanics in the community. I think they're just out to get rich. They're not thinking of, I'm like, hey, who are you going to sell to when all your clientele's dying? When all your clients are dying, who are you going to sell to?
Well, that leads us to, bringing that up leads us to the next aspect of our conversation. We started the dialogue about having you on the show to talk about when profit takes over the church. And, we see it in a lot of different religions, but since the majority of the population in the U.S. is Christian, what have you seen that it is disturbing? Because, again, we don't want to beat up on people. We don't want to overly criticize. But you just mentioned that,
Right.
The majority of the Hispanic population is Christian. A lot of people assume that everybody's Catholic, but it's actually not so true anymore. There's a big evangelical movement in Latin America, and it's coming to America as well. So let's say that it's 30-70 or whatever, or now there's even a lot of Hispanics who are not interested in religion. So to assume that every patient that we have who's Latino is a Catholic is a misnomer. But when we talk about being in America, I think that all the Christian denominations have realized that the only way you not only survive but thrive in America is if you use the corporate model. So what about this idea that not only you have to succeed in business, now you have to succeed in the religious world, and that you are looked down upon as someone who is spiritually, what is the word? You're neglecting your spirituality, or you're deficient if you're not successful. Where do you think people get this from? Because it seems to be totally in contrast with what is taught in the Christian scripture.
The gospel. Well, I think they're getting it from like big influential people like Lakewood, like Joel. And I'm not bashing Joel. I like Joel. I do. I think he's done a lot of good, but I think he's just, he's one of the prosperity, abundance message. I think that's where that's coming from. I also think that for the most part, evangelical Christians that are here are evangelized by Anglo community who's going to sell the American dream, but they're going to make it biblical, make the American dream of success and prosperity, and you're going to own a house. The Anglos who have evangelized the Latino community have pretty much mixed the message, the gospel with the American dream. And that's where I had a friend who 5 years ago, I got really ill. I don't know if I had said that to you or mentioned it to you, but I got really sick, and I managed to, I had to quit my job, and I had enough savings that I could live off my savings for 2 years. And that, to me, that's prosperous, and the disease brought a whole lot of prosperity in as far as my soul, the wealth of my spirituality. But she put me down. It was kind of strange to me, and I'm not complaining about it. But she was like, I'm so surprised, you should be thriving, and I thought, I thought that was very interesting. But again, I noticed she was from that perspective of okay, this is going to have to be edited out, but she was from the perspective of the prosperity thing. And I told her, I said, I said, I'm very blessed that I went through this illness. It's made me a lot more empathetic. You know, I'm very blessed that I had enough money, that I was able to have had enough money to live through. For 2 years, my car got paid. All my bills and needs were paid. I said, that's a great